I still remember the first time I met Tessa. It was at a Valentine's charity event 2 years ago. Ironic, right? I wasn't looking for love that night, just trying to distract myself from a recent breakup. But there she was, standing near the photo booth, laughing with her friends like the world revolved around her energy. She wasn't the kind of girl you forget easily. Confident, sharp, with that smile that made you believe you were the only one she was thinking about. We started talking, and within a week, we were inseparable. Fast forward 2 years, and we were living together in a cozy downtown apartment, sharing a dog, planning weekend trips, and for a while, I thought we were building something real. But lately, something had changed. Tessa started talking about timelines, about marriage, about how her friends were all getting engaged. It wasn't subtle. She'd drop hints every time we passed a jewelry store or when an engagement post popped up on Instagram. I loved her, but I wasn't ready to propose yet. I wanted to do it right, when it felt natural, not because of some social deadline. But then came the bomb. One evening, while we were having dinner, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you don't propose by Valentine's Day, I'll go back to my ex." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but her face told me she wasn't. I felt something inside me twist. Anger, disbelief, maybe heartbreak. I asked her if she really meant that, and she said, "I've waited long enough. I deserve commitment." I agreed she did, but I couldn't believe she was weaponizing love like that. The rest of the night was silent. For the next few days, she acted like nothing happened, posting cute couple photos, making plans for Valentine's Day dinner, while I kept replaying her words in my head. "I'll go back to my ex." That line burned like fire. I wasn't going to beg someone to stay, but I wasn't going to let her walk away feeling like she won either. So I decided, if she wanted a Valentine's surprise, I'd give her one she'd never forget. What she didn't know was that her ex she kept threatening me with was already in my DMs, and what I found out from him was about to change everything. I started by pretending to be the guy she wanted, overly romantic, nervy, anxious about the deadline, because if she wanted theatrics, I could deliver a performance that would expose the truth without me having to stoop to begging. I texted her more than usual, sent flowers with sweet notes, even though that kind of showmanship felt hollow coming from me, and I let her believe she was tightening the rope around my neck. Meanwhile, I quietly messaged Marcus, her ex, using the last name she'd mentioned in a drunken rant one night, and after a couple of awkward, probing texts, he answered. And when he realized who I was, he didn't get defensive, he got honest. Marcus told me things Tessa never thought I'd learn. She'd left him once because he couldn't keep up with bills. She had slept on the couch while he fixed the leaky sink and laughed about it with friends like it was character building. But she'd loved the escape of someone who could give her a nicer life for a minute. That didn't make her evil, it made her human. And it gave me the clarity I needed. This wasn't about a ring, it was about a pattern, and I wasn't going to be another stepping stone. I decided the surprise had to be surgical, theatrical enough to satisfy her craving for drama, but honest enough to break the narrative she'd been feeding herself. Step 1 was subtle. I let my behavior change in small, almost imperceptible ways so she'd relax and think the pressure was working. I started talking about future plans in vague terms, but refused to pick a date. I asked questions about her ex in casual, curious tones to see how she reacted, and I set up decoys, fake conversations with coworkers about engagement rings, even a staged oops voicemail where my sister teased me for being a little slow, all designed to make her feel triumphant and reckless. Step 2 was logistical. I booked the restaurant she'd hinted at months ago, but I reserved a private room and asked the maitre d' to play along. I ordered a ring box that contained not a ring, but a folded letter. I recruited allies. My best friend Sarah, who knew Tessa from college and despised her passive-aggressive timelines, agreed to be my co-conspirator and to subtly feed me intel when needed. Marcus agreed to meet me in person 2 nights before Valentine's Day, not to reconcile, but to tell me, straight to my face, what it had felt like when she broke his trust, so I could understand the patterns and make sure my reaction wasn't pure spite. Hearing Marcus speak, man to man, raw and unedited, made the plan crystallize. This wouldn't be a petty trap. It would be a mirror held up to her choices. The night before Valentine's Day, I mailed her a bouquet with a note that read, "Don't decide your life under pressure." And I watched her Instagram story respond with a GIF that could have meant anything. On Valentine's morning, I wore the kind of casual shirt she always said made me look like a boyfriend. I practiced my lines in the car like an actor rehearsing a confession, and while she was at work, I slipped into the restaurant to set the scene. A single candle, a flower on the table, a camera hidden behind the wine rack, because if this was going to be a lesson, I wanted it recorded, not to humiliate her online, but to keep the truth visible for both of us. When she arrived, glowing and a little smug, I let her lead. She kissed me like a woman who already won, told me between bites that she'd given me a week and watched for the panic. And then, at the exact moment she whispered, "So, what happens tonight?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small velvet box, and opened it so she could see the letter inside. I read it aloud. No accusations, no yelling, just a calm, blistering recount of the ultimatum, the patterns I'd uncovered, the fact that love isn't a deadline, and a line that landed harder than anything. I won't be someone's proof of success or a convenience to be returned when the price is right. The room felt like it stopped. Tessa's face changed, first to confusion, then to the flicker of panic I'd been waiting for. And that's when I knew the second part of the plan would have to begin, because exposing her would only start the unraveling. What I did next would determine whether she learned or simply doubled down. After she read the letter, and the air in that private room went thin, I watched her try to collect herself, first with a laugh that landed wrong, then with attempts to gaslight the moment by calling it a stunt and accusing me of making a scene. I stayed steady because the whole point wasn't to win an argument in a locked room. It was to make her confront the person she was becoming. When she demanded to know who else knew, I told her Sarah and Marcus were there, and I could see the color drain from her face as if she finally understood the stakes. She asked to leave, and I let her, but I followed because this was not the time to lose my nerve. Outside, under the dim glow of the streetlights, she tried to flip the script. Tears, charm, recollections of good times, and for a second I felt the old softness for her that had made me stay in the first place. But then she said something that sealed my decision. "You're making this about control. You're trying to punish me for wanting security." That line was everything, because she'd framed her ultimatum as self-care, as standards, while the truth was she wanted an external proof that she could trade up if bored. I told her calmly that wanting security was valid, but demanding it from someone on a timeline was not. She screamed that I was throwing away our future, that I was selfish for not giving her the ring she wanted, and people on the sidewalk turned to stare, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I did something unexpected. I handed her my keys and said, "Then go. If you need a ring to feel secure, go get it. But don't make me the exit strategy when another option appears." Her mouth opened like she'd been slapped, and she sputtered about threats and ultimatums and how I'd staged the whole thing to humiliate her. That's when Marcus stepped out of the shadows. He'd agreed to be there in case things spiraled, and he walked up, looked at her with a kind of quiet pity, and said, "You used to say you loved me for who I was, Tessa. Now you want a version of me with nicer clothes." The words were not cruel, they were true, and something in her posture broke. In the days that followed, she tried to play the victim publicly, texting mutual friends, posting ambiguous stories about betrayal, painting me as the man who ruined Valentine's, but having Sarah and Marcus quietly share their side tempered the narrative. Sarah posted a subtle but devastating throwback of Tessa bragging about how she always knew how to pick a better life. And Marcus sent a message to a group chat revealing receipts of broken promises. The truth has a way of seeping through. Meanwhile, I did not gloat online. I let the recordings and messages speak for themselves when necessary, but mostly I focused on myself,
returning to the gym, restarting hobbies I had shelved, and spending time with friends who reminded me why I deserved someone who loved me without conditions. Part of the plan had been to make her see what she was losing by leaving without truly understanding me. And another part was to protect my own pride and dignity. Revenge for me was never about public spectacle. It was about reclaiming my narrative and refusing to be manipulated. As she realized that her attempts to drag me into drama were failing, her tactics escalated. She started showing up at places she knew I'd be, trying to force confrontations, posting screenshots of private conversations and captioning them with emotional pleas. And once, she even waited outside my building late at night until a neighbor asked me if everything was okay. Each stunt only made her seem more erratic, and people who cared about both of us began to distance themselves from the toxicity. I could have blocked her, taken the high road and walked away quietly, but I wanted this to be more than a breakup. I wanted to make sure she understood the consequences of treating people like placeholders. So I did one more thing that surprised everyone. I invited her to coffee, not to reconcile, but to offer a clean, honest conversation in public. We sat across from each other, and I listened as she tried to justify her threats as standing up for herself. And when she paused, I asked her directly about the ex, about the pattern Marcus described, and whether she had thought about the person on the other side of her ultimatum. She faltered, and for the first time I saw real regret flicker. It wasn't remorse for the pain she had caused me, but for the version of herself that had been willing to gamble on someone else's heart. I told her that I hoped she would learn, that I hoped she would stop using love as leverage. And then I left, calm, unbothered, and certain that the rest of my life wouldn't be dictated by her demands. The aftermath was messy for a while. Mutual friends nervously asked questions. She attempted a couple of public apologies that felt performative, and I kept my distance. No dramatic posts, no petty comments, just steady life, steady healing, and an openness to whatever came next. What I hadn't expected was how people reached out afterwards. Friends thanked me for not sinking to her level. Colleagues told me they admired my restraint, and even strangers messaged to say the video resonated. I hadn't made that recording to go viral, but when a close friend edited a private clip into a short about standing up to manipulation and posted it anonymously, it struck a nerve, and suddenly the story wasn't just about me and Tessa. It was about anyone who'd ever been pressured into proving their worth. That shift from personal revenge to a broader message felt strangely redeeming. And as the heat around the breakup cooled, I found my thoughts turning less to retaliation and more to rebuilding. Still, there was one last turn left in this that none of us anticipated. Tessa's next move would either cement her growth or expose her for good. And I was ready to see which she would choose.
2 weeks after that coffee meeting, when I finally thought the storm had passed, I got a message from an unknown number that read, "You should see what she's doing now." It was a screenshot. Tessa had started a YouTube channel, telling her side of the story, calling it "The Valentine's Ultimatum That Broke Me." She painted herself as the victim, claiming I humiliated her with a fake proposal, saying I'd manipulated her emotions to teach her a lesson. At first, I laughed. It was typical of her to rewrite the story. But as views climbed and people began leaving comments, calling me a narcissist, I realized she was milking the drama for sympathy. My friends told me to ignore it, but I knew this was bigger than gossip now. It was her attempt to control the final narrative again. So I decided not to fight fire with fire, but to expose the truth calmly, the same way I had before. I gathered everything, the recordings, the texts, the message from Marcus, and even her Valentine's ultimatum written in her own handwriting from that dinner note she'd left behind. I didn't upload them publicly. Instead, I wrote my own open letter, posted anonymously on a relationship advice forum where authenticity mattered more than clicks. I titled it, "When Love Becomes an Ultimatum,"
and told the story exactly as it happened, without insults, without naming names, just the facts. Within days, the post blew up. People started connecting the dots to her video, realizing who the boyfriend really was, and suddenly, the tide turned. The comments under her video shifted from sympathy to skepticism. "You left out details," one wrote. "He sounds like he handled it with maturity," said another. The power she had over the story crumbled in real time. She deleted the video within 24 hours, but the internet doesn't forget. I didn't gloat. I simply felt free. The revenge wasn't in destroying her image. It was in her realizing she couldn't rewrite the truth anymore. A week later, Marcus texted me again. He'd seen the post, too. He said he was proud of how I handled it, and told me she'd reached out to him, apologizing for the way she'd used both of us. Apparently, she wanted to make peace. He didn't respond, and neither did I. By March, my life was lighter. I got a promotion at work, started running again. Even met someone new. Her name was Elise, a graphic designer with this calm energy that made me realize what real compatibility felt like. There were no games, no deadlines, no pressure. Just easy, quiet warmth. But Tessa wasn't done entirely. One night, she showed up outside my apartment, eyes red, voice trembling, saying she just wanted closure. I invited her up, not out of weakness, but to finally put an end to the cycle. She looked around, noticing the small changes, the lack of her things, the life that had moved on without her. "You really did replace me fast," she said bitterly. I told her, "I didn't replace you. I just stopped waiting for someone who wanted to change me." For a moment, she softened, whispering that she'd wished she'd handled things differently, that she thought pushing me would prove my love. I told her, love doesn't need proof. It needs patience. She cried quietly, nodded, and walked out. I didn't stop her this time. Watching her leave felt like watching the final page of a long, painful book close for good. Later that night, I deleted her number. No hatred, no regret, just silence. Revenge, I learned, wasn't always about payback. Sometimes it was about peace. Peace that comes when the person who tried to control you finally realizes they can't anymore. But life, it seemed, wasn't done giving me closure yet, because 1 month later, an unexpected message from someone else would prove that Tessa's story, and my own, still had one twist left.
The message came from Elise one evening while I was finishing up a client call. It wasn't one of her usual sweet notes about dinner plans or a new art project. It was a single screenshot with the caption, "Thought you should see this." The image showed a new post on Tessa's private account, a picture of me and Elise walking out of a cafe, clearly taken without us knowing. The caption said, "He replaced love with convenience. Guess the next Valentine's Day came early." My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disappointment. After everything, after the closure, she still couldn't let go of the narrative that made her feel like the victim. I could have ignored it, but Elise looked genuinely hurt. She asked quietly, "Is she still obsessed with you?" And I didn't know how to answer without sounding defensive. I told her the truth, that Tessa was struggling to move on and that I hadn't spoken to her since that night she came by. Elise nodded, but stayed quiet, and that silence made me realize how toxic echoes can infect even the healthiest new start. I knew I had to end it permanently. So I did something I never thought I would. I contacted Tessa one last time. I called, not texted, because tone mattered. When she picked up, she sounded startled, maybe even guilty. I told her calmly, "You're not my villain anymore, but I won't let you be part of my life in any way, not through your stories, your posts, or your bitterness." She tried to justify the post, saying it was just venting. But I interrupted. Venting isn't stalking. You took a photo of me without my consent. There was silence, then a soft, "I'm sorry," the first genuine one I'd ever heard from her. I told her I wasn't calling to fight. I was calling to forgive. I said forgiveness wasn't for her, it was for me, so I could stop carrying her weight around. She sniffled, whispered that she understood, and hung up. That should have been the end, but life, with its strange timing, had one more twist. 2 days later, Marcus called. He'd bumped into Tessa at a mutual friend's event. Apparently she was different, quieter, more reflective. She told Marcus she'd been in therapy, that she'd started journaling about her patterns, and that seeing her own actions from someone else's perspective had made her realize how deeply she'd hurt the people who actually cared about her. Marcus told me she didn't want anything from me. No closure, no reunion, just to say she finally saw the damage she'd done. I didn't know whether to believe it, but a part of me hoped it was true. Maybe she'd finally learned to love without turning it into a transaction. A few weeks later, Elise and I took a weekend trip to the coast. Small town, clean air, ocean hum. On the pier, she looked at me and said, "You're not the same person in that story, are you?" I smiled and said, "No." That story ended when I stopped playing someone else's role. For the first time in months, I felt like the past wasn't chasing me. The revenge had evolved into something purer. Closure, forgiveness, and strength. Still, part of me wondered if the story would ever really end, because even healed wounds can echo in unexpected ways. And one final echo was already on its way, hidden in an envelope waiting at my apartment when we returned from the trip, marked with Tessa's handwriting and no return address.
When I got back from the coast, the envelope was sitting in my mailbox like some relic from another lifetime. No return address, just my name in her handwriting, the kind I'd once recognized even from across a crowded room. I turned it over a few times, debating whether to open it. Elise noticed it and asked softly, "Do you want to?" I hesitated, then said, "I need to, so I can finally stop wondering." Inside was a single folded page and a small Polaroid photo of us from 2 years ago, the night we adopted our dog, back when everything felt easy. The letter began simply, "This isn't an apology you're supposed to answer." She wrote about therapy, about finally seeing that the things she'd called standards were actually control mechanisms born out of fear of being alone. She said she used to believe love had to be proven by milestones, rings, posts, validation, but now she realized that the quiet moments were what actually built it. Then came the part that stopped me cold. "You didn't just reject my ultimatum. You showed me what love without manipulation looks like. I just wasn't ready for it then." She wrote that she wasn't asking for another chance, just peace, the kind that comes when you finally let go of the version of yourself that keeps burning bridges. She said she'd left the city and moved back to her hometown to take care of her grandmother, that she'd deleted all the videos, and that she hoped I'd never have to hear her name again in any context but forgiveness. At the bottom, she wrote one last line that hit harder than any revenge ever could. "Thank you for teaching me that silence is sometimes the loudest answer." I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Elise read it too, then gently took it from my hands, folded it back up and said, "That's her closure. Yours is living." We went for a walk afterward, the air crisp, the sky bleeding orange into dusk, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or victory. I felt gratitude, because revenge had turned into redemption, not just for me, but for her too. Months later, on the anniversary of that infamous Valentine's Day, I found the old velvet ring box in a drawer, the one that once held the letter. I smiled, walked down to the pier, and tossed it into the water. The splash was small, but it felt like a thunderclap in my chest, final, cleansing, irreversible. Love had taught me that you can't build a future on ultimatums, that the real win is walking away with peace instead of proof. And as the ripples faded into the ocean, I realized that was my real proposal, not to anyone else, but to myself, to never let fear, pressure, or deadlines define love again.